hour rolling in. 9, 10, 11, 12.
How you feeling?
Me? I'm doing
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about lesson planning. I actually am. It's kind of my jam.
That's cute.
Yeah, it's fun putting because we're always putting together art presentations of our art practice. So it's
Yeah.
fun putting a presentation together of the teaching practice. And like going back in time and you're like, whoa, we've definitely done some stuff, done a lot.
Actually, how long has it been?
It's a good reflective journey.
How long has it been since you've been teaching art?
I think I started around art specifically when I started like taking it seriously and teaching workshops when I was 23 or so,
Like
32.
9
So
years?
yeah, 9 years, I think, when I started to really take teaching seriously and started exploring doing it in as many different places as possible. Before then, I taught more so like if a teacher called on me and wanted me to demo something. But it was the first time I think I created lesson plans was when I started the Valley Print Studio in the Valley.
Oh, you know what? I just realized that Mariana is frozen because she's waiting for us to just go.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, because I thought we were waiting for attendees to come in. So now we have like 26. How many
Yeah,
are
I'm a
you
little
expecting?
confused about the process at the moment. So, Mariana, can you hear us?
We're streaming live,
okay.
so go ahead and introduce.
Okay.
And you can just explain that it's for your class and then read your introduction, and you guys are ready to get started.
Okay, can you introduce yourself to my class also?
Sure. Hi. I'm Mariana Pomonos. I'm an assistant professor of art education, and this is a series of visiting artist lectures of teaching and socially engaged artists who are here to talk about issues regarding classroom and community and their artist practices. And we're graciously being sponsored by the Grand Central Arts Center. Special thanks to John Spiak at Grand Central Arts, as well as the California State University College of the Arts and the Association of Historic Curators. So welcome.
All right, and thanks, Mariana, because you actually hooked all of that up. Thank you. So now you said that you wanted the students to put questions onto the chat. So what I have there, I put a comment there, which is, dear class, for credit during the webinar, you will need to place at least one question on the chat. Do you want them to do it by a certain time, or does it matter at all, really?
No, just at the end when we get to the Q&A, we're going to be reading the questions from the chat, so it helps to engage them directly.
Okay, excellent. All right. And then someone just wants to know if everyone's mics are muted throughout the webinar.
That's correct. Students won't be able to speak during the webinar. It'll just be the presenters. So both of you two will be able to speak.
All right, so students will be able to communicate via the chat.
That's correct.
All right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start reading Zeina's biography. It's a very short bio here, but not because she hasn't done a lot. She's been, as she just said a moment ago, teaching for 9 years. And actually, I don't know when you started exhibiting art, but ever since I've known her, which has been 4 or 5 years, she's been very active in the artistic community here in Los Angeles. Zeina Baltagi is an artist and educator based out of Los Angeles Born in Stockton, California, and raised between California and Lebanon. Baltagi's work reveals intimate transformations in relation to lived experiences with physical, emotional, economic, and cultural mobility. Baltagi received a Bachelor's of Arts from California State University, Northridge, and a Master's in Fine Arts Provost Fellowship from University of California, Davis. She has exhibited her work, including, but not limited to, Basement Gallery, Los Angeles Road Concerts, PØST, Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, BG Gallery, 11:11, is that right? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, 11:11.
11:11, a creative collective, and Klowden Mann. Baltagi has exhibited and lectured at university galleries, including University of Southern California, Claremont Graduate University, California Lutheran University, and Cuesta College. All right, and just if you could just tell us some places that you've actually taught art, that would be really great too.
Yes, sure. So I graduated from Cal State University in Northridge with an emphasis in printmaking and fine art. And after graduation, I co-founded a printmaking studio in the San Fernando Valley, and we called it the Valley Print Studio. We created a GoFundMe and got etching presses and a screen printing unit, and we started teaching workshops out of my friend Miles Lewis's garage, essentially. Eventually out of that, I did that for 3 or so years where we were really just building our workshop lesson plans and working with the community. And I think that's when I really worked the most directly with creating, it was exciting creating basically an alternative school to academic school. After that, I realized I was like, oh wait, I'm not necessary actually as much for the functioning of the printmaking studio. We expanded the Valley Print Studio and we called it the Valley Art Workshop, and expanded it to making it like a toolbox. We would invite visiting artists in to teach their own specialty. So each artist usually has their own way of making something. So they could pull that skill out of their toolbox and then teach that through the Valley Art Workshop. So at some point, I kind of let that go to Miles Lewis because it was fully functional within its own realm, and it's still functioning. You could go to valleyartworkshop.com. It's happening. It's in the San Fernando Valley, and that is also through that work. It eventually got under the umbrella of 11:11, a creative collective, which I've done a lot of work with. Once they received their nonprofit status of 501c3, the Valley Arts Workshop kind of went into that. The reason why I had let go of Valley Workshops because I wanted to explore Los Angeles. I was so young and I was making work, and I was all I want to try my hand at being a full artist as much as I love community outreach and workshops and work like that. So then I moved through to Los Angeles, and I taught it everything that that would allow me, basically. So I did a lot of volunteer workshops at first. Teaching is really interesting because you have to build up into it. It was almost like volunteer freelance. I did a lot of workshop at the International Printing Museum in Carson City. I did workshops all over Art Center, Kids, Inner City Arts, various places where I would do little workshops here and there. I'd be invited for a 3-day workshop in bookbinding or paper making or paper marbling. At some point, I was really excited. I found a longer term teaching position at Los Angeles Music and Art School, and it's in East LA, LA Muse Art. And I taught there for a little over 4 years. And that was where I really started to learn what kind of teacher I am. I started to teach. I've always taught with different age groups and in different cities and places, but with LA Muse Art, it allowed me to really keep my feet in one place and consistently teach a group of kids over 4 years of time, because they would come every week after school and I would see them consistently for years. So I watch these kids grow, and I grew with them, and it was really a pivotal thing for me to grow as a teacher. Yeah. And then I met Zeal through the Camera Obscura. I inaugurated that residency actually a while ago. I don't even remember what year. I think 2000.
It was 2016 when I was there.
So I was there then 2 years before, 2014. It was I was kind of the first artist in residence in the space. And one of the printmaking presses from the Valley Print Studio that we founded, the Camera Obscura bought it. So essentially what I did at the Valley Print Studio, I did at the Camera Obscura. I equipped it with a printmaking press and started creating a printmaking lab and then workshops out of that space. And then it became more of like an artistic hub for artists because the coordinator of the Camera Obscura is run by the city of Santa Monica, and they really wanted it to become like an accessible art residency. So the printmaking press kind of became the center point of that. And I consistently constantly proposed workshops through there, which I will talk about that in my presentation.
All right, excellent. Are
The
you ready?
customizing of workshops and how at some point, the more you do it, the more you become known for like something that like the more you enjoy teaching a certain subject, like the more you get known for that subject and that skill. And I think over the years, it may have not been fully intentional, but I've created somewhat of like a repetitive, a kind of, what's the word? I just became known for like DIY workshops. Like someone needs to fill in this blank, call Zeina. She'll like DIY that thing, you know? Like I became known as like, as the person to call for like, oh, I have like 100 kids doing Earth Day. Let's hit up Zeina. She'll teach them something or whatever. So it kind of, that's where I started going all over the place. Let me share some screen.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind the class that at any time, if you have questions that come up during the talk, you can just put them onto the chat. That way, when we get to the end of the talk, we won't be waiting for questions to come in. They'll already be there. Thank you all. Are you ready, Zeina?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me share my screen. And what I'm going to share with you is generously just like my straight lesson plans. I think it's best as a teacher, I know that it's best for me to teach students by simply showing them. So I'm going to show you a breakdown of exactly how I approach creating a project or a lesson plan for a class or a group of students. Slideshow. From start. All right. If you want my website, it's right there. So I'm going to start pretty basic. So I'm going to start with like kindergarten and make it really, really young. With every lesson plan, there's always an objective to every plan. And I always add also like, what are the kids going to be gaining as an outcome out of the workshop, the class, or whatever you do? And always, so this is, clarity is really important as well. So with little kids, it's important to create the outline that's going to hook the student into wanting to take the class, but also you need to present to the parent as to why they're signing their kid up for that class. What is that child going to gain from spending those few hours with you? So here's one on like collaging a house with circles and squares and triangles is a pretty basic plan. Adding materials, vocab lists, an exact activity, laying out what you're going to do, and an assessment. It's important that like there is an assessment after every single project. And then I always use artists in comparison to the plan that are local. It's kind of a goal of mine that I find contemporary local artists from the specific area. So this one is inspired by Ashley Hagen, the artist. They are a San Fernando Valley artist that works a lot with creating their own houses. And then you have first grade, and this is like abstract monoprint when you altering, it's just a printmaking method that's really painterly. And it's always creating an objective up top, specifically what is the class about, and then why is the student trying to take the class. So introducing printmaking opens the new artistic possibilities for children, and monoprinting creates a one-of-kind of a work encompassing painting, drawing, and printing in one process. So it really would expand like a first grader's brain as to what art is. I always think about equitability with students. So I always put within it alternatives to the materials themselves. So you could use like a small plexiglass square, or you could use like a styrofoam plate. And if you don't have a styrofoam plate, you could find something else. So constantly checking in with the students to make sure that they have access to the supplies that we use. And I think I got known for more so DIY printmaking lesson plans, because I try to make it so that the materials can be purchased at like a basic Target 99-cent store or items from around the house in order to produce the plan itself. And then an artist that would be inspiring to refer to, I would prefer to like Pamela Smith Hudson. They're also an LA-based artist that are an abstract printmaker that studied at Gemini GEL. Within your activities, there's an outline within an outline. So I think creating timelines is like a teacher's best friend. I create timelines per hour essentially, and I create assessments per that time period. So whether a class is 1 day long or a weekend class or an 8-week course, I'm creating an activity within that day, and then I'm assessing, did I achieve those goals for the day with those students? Same, let's say if I'm teaching a 4-hour workshop, I'm checking in and splitting up that workshop into each hour, and I'm assessing, did we achieve those goals by hour, so that by the end of the course, I know that I was able to express what I wanted to within the exercise to the students. So there's always a way where you could, whether it's a class for a little kid or an adult or elderly, you could really teach, to me, I don't really change the subjects as much. Like I could teach the same subject to a little kid, like relief printing, and teach relief printing at a 4-unit course at a university as well. They both would gather a similar skill set and will understand what relief printing is, but I may make it more complex for the fitting of the 4-unit class. And also the university class would have facilities and other access that would like complex the project a little more. So relief printing within a classroom, I try to make it very clear. And then if I'm doing that, let's say in a workshop setting and it's a 1-day setting, and I only have four hours to teach that course, then I have to split up creating the image, transferring the image onto my plate, giving the student time to carve that image, print that and proof that image, and print an edition. And to do that within like a 4-hour span, it really takes a lot of organization of time. And I think students can tell when teachers are flustered. Like they totally could tell. So I think it's our responsibility to not only manage our time, but manage the students' time, which seems nuts, like it's too much on our plate, but it is our responsibility to create an outline that's clear enough that for the students to follow. Once you teach one thing like relief printing, then you can always alter and adjust it to different environments. Like, okay, I'm relief printing on fabric. From this exercise, okay, I taught relief printing at the Valley Print Studio. I went to the International Print Museum and taught relief printing, and I taught relief printing on fabric through the camera obscura and experimented with that. Through that, I was able to then create DIY printmaking and textile design and propose that course to Art Center kids. So when you're exploring, looking for jobs as an educator, I found the best route for me personally was to always look for things that are missing to try and fill in the gaps. Same when you're trying to do community outreach within an area. Really look at what's already there and what is something that you could contribute in addition to that. So in order for me, I knew I wanted to try my hand at teaching a course at Art Center. So I wrote a class on DIY printmaking and textiles design using the previous projects that I had with little kids, and then, but wrote it for Art Center. And then because they don't have that, they had like architecture, they had animation. It was a pretty killer class on animation. I wanted to take it. And illustration, and they had different courses. So that was something that I could like propose that isn't already existing on their catalog of things. Same with like looking for work at like inner city arts or other places like that. Really just look at what do they already have there? What is then within my skill set that I could contribute to that in addition? So moving up to like, let's say I'm going into a 3rd grade level of his paper making. And I try to give it levels to myself. This is kind of like an organization for myself. I will also put in like the hours it took to teach the class after I teach the course, and how much hours I put in preparing for it, because then it gives me a gauge to like guesstimate. If I were to propose this workshop again, I could be like, 3 hours was a little rush. I'm going to move it up to 4 hours. So I think like writing everything down is really important as a teacher after a course as well, and like assessing what went wrong and problem solving and adding that to your course so that it's constantly evolving. I never knew everything when I first started teaching. It like you're learning, and it's growing as you grow. So you have a very basic kind of assessment of an objective, your materials, a vocabulary, activity, and assessment. I think assessments are really important. Even if it's not graded, this gives a gauge, this gives like a direction for the students and for them to achieve. And within that, it makes the student feel successful when they do get there. And that is encouraging for them to make more art. So whether paper making is done in a course, there's going to be situations and different activities, especially working with the community, where it's like, sometimes you're present and sometimes you're not present. And so you need to teach, you want to teach that same course to the students, but you need to, depending on the needs of the community, is how much prep work you need to give them in detail instruction. So within this paper making zine, it's an instruction for paper making, and it was going to go into art kits for the Crenshaw Dairy Mart in Inglewood, California. So because I'm not present in teaching this workshop, I needed to be very specific with the steps and like detailed with pictures because I'm not present. And at the same time, I'm trying to create exercises for students that they could do on their own without like parental guardianship, if they don't have parental guardianship there to look after them. So it's important that like what I teach, the student could go home or walk away from it and be able to do it independently without me. So one moment. I have also a little section onto my website where I put a passworded education section, and I use this as like, I'm starting to use this as my go-to all for further plans, and PowerPoint doesn't let me put in my full PDFs. So I'm going to use this. I hope you could see it. So I'm very clear, like with the step-by-step instructions, but inside the instructions, there's instructions and tips. I love adding tips and options. So throughout all of my instructionals, I'll always put tips and then added optional, like you may add flat, lightweight objects like glitter, flower, string of things you find. And like within my demos and within my instructionals, you give them the basics, but always give them an example for experimentation, because what we're expecting as educators usually is we're giving them the bare minimum. We want them to do that bare minimum. That's a C. You need to go above that to actually get the A, if this was like a graded thing. But even within workshops or whatever, my goal is that I give them the skill set to then experiment and play with it and make art with it. So I like to give like examples of things that you could do, and then that sparks imagination for them to play more with it.
And then can you open the window a little bit more?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you.
So I have fun with it. There's always tips. Be gentle. It's easy to lift the sensitive paper. I think those things are important because the more I teach each subject, sometimes like you go through, you hit problem solving situations. And within that, every time I like write it down, I'm like, I'm going to put that in there because that's another tip that I could give a heads up to someone else so they don't have to make that same mistake as me. Or they could, but I gave you a heads up. I'm going to go back to my presentation real quick. Oh, shit. So being very clear, so it's not like I take pictures and do step-by-steps for each one in such detail, but this is what I mean by altering your lesson plan for that's suitable for each project. So if a project is 1 day long, be very realistic as to how much you could manage within that day. If it's a weekend long, do that if you're present for the workshop, or if you're not present for the workshop. There's like factors for you to put in into how much you need to preliminarily give to the student before the class even, before they go into the class. I think, yeah. So here's just some pictures. This is me at like 23 at the Valley Print Studio in my friend's garage teaching paper making, and then shifting into the camera obscura and alternating from there. Allowing experimentation within the project is always very important. And making time for that. Making timelines is really important, and making, allotting time for that space for that experimentation to happen. So now I'm going to translate basically when you're teaching for kids, like let's say teaching classes at LA MuseArt or like International Printing Museum, in different spaces, or whether making an art kit or translating that to like a level course. So I'm going to break down basically teaching a course at UC Davis, which I co-taught a class with Kaz Azevedo in beginning printmaking because it's my jam. And
why? I don't think you've told us that. Why do you love printmaking so much?
I love it's rooted in revolution and in protest, from zine making to alternative text in the Chicano movement and all around the world. And I think that's like super cool history from printmaking. I think in layers within my work, so I think it naturally lended to that, to printing in layers. And maybe I'm a little masochistic because it also requires so much labor for a result, and I am really into some tedious labor, I guess. I just like, it's part of my practice, is that like I like making plans for an end goal, and printmaking does that. And I think the way even I break down like teaching lessons in that way, it's very printmakerly, where the more organized you are and the more prep work you do, the easier for you it is in the end. And that's how printmaking is. It's all prep work, and in the end you pull the print, and it's like this like satisfying thing, or really unsatisfying thing after all of that work. And so I don't know, it just became my thing. It's just like, yeah. It was also the first art class I took in community college. So it was kind of one of my early exposures to art, other than like drawing and painting in my sketchbook. So that's why I'm really into print. And also my dive into paper making was basically wanting to make a work of art where I am controlling the material meaning from its start to finish. And with paper making, I could really imbue material meaning from the substrate all the way to the image that I place onto the substrate. So it really lended well to like expressing myself in my artistic practice. Yeah. So there's that. So regardless of whether I'm teaching like a kindergarten class or a university class, it's very similar. You have your description, that's the hook that brings them in. The course, then the specificity of the course description, what is the students going to be gaining out of this class? Just like I would need to just like the earlier sheets are a contract between essentially me and the parent as to this is what I'm going to be doing with your child. This is a contract between me and the student and the undergrad, saying that you could hold me. This is my contract between you and the student, between me and the undergrad student. So being very clear and specific with my goals and my objectives, my learning outcomes out of the course, it's really important, I think, to be clear from the get-go on all of that. I know I keep repeating that, but it makes it easier later on. So
Just want to let you know it's about 5 o'clock right now, just so you have a
shoot, am I
time.
talking way over?
I mean, it's so easy to talk for a long time.
It really is. So just as much as important it is to, I'm gonna exit out of this then. Okay, just like it's important for me to be very clear within those lesson plans, it's important for me to be clear within college syllabuses. And I do always think this is what I really drive in with teaching in different diverse communities and environments. It's not a matter of really altering my lesson plan, other than I really have a goal of finding artists from the community that I'm teaching in. It's a matter of being clear with the goals, the outcomes, very specific written instructions to every single project that I do. And I always add tips and problem solving things and alternatives. And then the assignment rubric, that's like for anything that's graded, I find it very important to have a clear rubric, and it's never tied to the content of what the project is. It's always tied to, did they complete the technical aspects of the assignment. We leave the content part for critical review for like critiques and stuff like that. So always written instructions, clear rubric, written instructions, clear rubric. This may be the same assignment as mono printing as the little kids. It's just elaborated for facilities for a UC department. And I always, within projects, let one build onto the next. So there's like, the student will always take what they learned from the prior course and expound upon it within the next course. So I think that's also important if you have like 8 to 10 week session with students. And always allowing for rooms of experimentation. So whether it is a Simpsons character or a photo of your couch, I'm expecting, I'm grading on technical proficiency for the most part in hours. So for a general course, I would expect the same amount of hours that you do in the classroom, outside the classroom. So if the class is 6 hours long, it takes about 6 hours of work of homework is the required amount for that class. And I love vocab. I would give vocab quizzes if I could. I just quizzes. Step by step. It's always really important. Like I said, this is a very elaborate etching process. It's a 4-step process of line, aquatint, sheen colle. If you look further into printmaking, it can get really complex. And how would you teach that to a beginning printmaker and not overwhelm them? And you really have to make it into bite-sized pieces. And it's the same aspect with little kids. So if I'm teaching, I always like making your own zine project. So if I'm teaching dimensional shapes, I'm going to split up line and shading into 2 different sections, in essence, for the student. And I would usually even put in a time limit of like, okay, this takes 30 minutes. This is a 30-minute course. So like I'm splitting up my class per hour or per 30-minute, so that it will like build up into further. So if I'm drawing the human form, I'm not going to teach them everything about the human form. You can't learn anatomy in a day. It's just not realistic. But I could teach them proportion within the first hour, gesture within the second hour, contour within the third hour, and then let that go. And here are some like basic things of like advice that I was thinking about. And I'll leave it for some questions and answers. So it's really important to listen to the needs of the community you're teaching and filling the gaps of education with like really thoughtful things that would be contributing and useful. So filling that void, allow students to creatively explore and evolve your original lesson plan. So do this with multiple check-ins during a workshop or an extended course of time. I'm always checking in with my students and adapting how I teach for the student specifically. It seems like a lot of extra work for the teacher, but in the end, it helps the teacher and it helps the student, and it makes everything just go smoothly with like more regular check-ins. Be very clear with the objectives of the course, because if you're confused, the student is definitely confused. So what I mean by like creating tailored, even though it's the same subject, tailored to each student, is you're using everything at your disposal to teach the student, using visual, audio, instructional text, all in conjunction with each other, and preparing that for the students and prior to the class. I think this is important to me because if I have a student that is less visual and I'm doing everything over the Zoom via demo, if I don't have an instructional text to follow up on that, they're going to be like, huh? Like you are probably right now in this lecture, like, huh? Sorry. So I think we could teach the same subject, but with numerous approaches. So it makes it accessible to each one. And understanding the difference between a day, a week, and an 8 to 10 week course, like really making it manageable for you. You could always start basic and like add to it, but it is very difficult to play catch up with yourself in a class. I just found that to be the most detrimental to a class, is when we're playing catch up constantly. And that's usually because of my poor organization in the beginning of the course and throwing too much all at once and not, chewing it up slowly. So my principles, being very clear, super organized, active listening to students and assessing the response to the students' needs as they change over the course, and outlining time as your friend. Organize your hour, your day, your week, make clear objectives. And then my assessment for this lecture questions to you: did you gain understanding of how to form a lesson plan? What are the 3 principles of teaching that I reiterated throughout this lecture? And do you feel confident in creating and implementing your own lesson plan now?
I just want to let you know that also they haven't been introduced to lesson planning yet. So, this is going to be like a nice appetizer for later on. And
Nice.
a lot of it might be over their heads right now, but they're asking really great questions. And I may have told them to put the questions in the wrong place. I'm not too sure. I actually got a text message from a student who was like, are we supposed to put the questions on the chat or on the Q&A? And I was like,
Yeah.
So maybe we start with the 2 that are on the Q&A and then go over to the chat. And I just want to thank you for that presentation so far. I actually thought you were going to include more of your own personal artwork as well.
Yeah, I decided, I was like, I have so much to talk about teaching.
Okay.
So I just honed that in. And I know
They
that's
can go to your website and look at videos, right?
exactly. Just look at myname.com.
Can you actually see the Q&A? Do you want me to read the questions, or do you want to choose questions off of it?
I'm gonna try, I'll go through it. So I have one here. I'll just go down the list. Isabel said, please let me know if I'm sorry if I really say your name wrong. That's also like the teacher foul, as we're constantly saying everyone's names wrong. What are some formal, informal assessment tools that you use during your lessons? So I do informal assessments, check-ins with the students, usually after it could be throughout the course. So if it's a workshop, I'm really walking around the classroom all the time, kind of like, it's very easy when you're in a class because you kind of like walk behind the student immediately and just give them direct feedback. But when it comes to a formal assessment, like I go directly by a rubric. do you have clean edges in your print? Did you use a minimum of 3 layers in your print? Did you use complementary colors properly? Like, I'm really assessing specifically basic on art principles, and less on context in that say. But I do also do, even with little kids or adults, I always do, before a project, like a preliminary, what are you interested in? I don't know if that answers the question. So my assessments are always based off of the rubric. So
I'm going to jump in and ask you a question. How do you get ideas for lesson plans?
I use my own art practice as inspiration. So when I was teaching a lot of paper making, I was doing a lot of paper making within my own work. You could find some works. One was called A Path to Wreckage on my website. And within that work, I took gas station lottery tickets and receipts that I gathered, and then made paper tires out of it and installations. I was working a lot with paper, so it kind of translated really easily to making a paper making lesson plan.
What do you recommend for students who don't have an art practice, who don't make art, for example? Most of the students in this class, I think there's only 3 students who are actually art majors.
Yeah, so I would gear it towards something that you're interested in. So only because I'm not a writing major doesn't mean that I couldn't teach creative writing. So I would, and if you want to go into teaching art courses, you can still teach an art course, but like alter it to fit within your own skill set. So if you're more technically skilled in teaching drawing, then go for that. But if you're more technically skilled in the conceptual side, then you could create a conceptual workshop, an idea around a subject, and like teach that way. So there are workshops that are really conceptually based. So for example, Carmina Escobar uses a lot of vocal workshops, intuitive with their voice. So it's less object making. So you could create any workshop out of a subject that you're interested in. It's sharing. Teaching is sharing. It's a really generous act. So just really think like you are being very generous with what you do know, and what you don't know, you could always learn. So give yourself credit. Like, even if you aren't an art major, it doesn't mean that you can't figure out paper making or paper marbling enough to teach it. So I think for the most part, what makes a good teacher is having good problem solving skills. Being able to assess something, analyze it, and find a solution for it. If you're capable of that, then you're capable of teaching, regardless of the subject.
Would you like to take a look at the chat?
Yeah,
and
so
the questions that are there?
how do you decide what to teach certain grade levels? What is the different techniques you use? Okay, so if I'm teaching kindergartners, you have to think of motor reflexes and motor skills of the students that you're teaching. So if I'm teaching kindergartners within that collage class, what am I actually teaching those students in that? And I could share a screen with you. So within that, the objective is not exactly like they learn the circles, squares, and triangles, but what's most important is the use of the tools and the skills of using scissors, glue, and paper, and the hand-eye coordination. So really think about like, what are things that kindergartners could help them with hand-eye coordination? Like using a pair of safety scissors is one thing that could work with that. And so I really think of a base within the lessons. So as long most projects could easily be done, most projects can be done non-toxic. So I wouldn't be afraid of also teaching young kids complex ideas, because their brains are malleable and they get it. So the monoprinting that I'm teaching first graders is not that much different, honestly, from undergraduate 4-unit university monoprinting. They both are learning monoprinting. The only difference is that the 4-unit university people have presses and facilities and money. But they're literally the first graders learning as much about monoprinting as that college class. So I really like merging those two things, but it is important to think of motor skills. That's the most that I'm thinking about when it comes to different grade levels. Middle schoolers, I love teaching middle schoolers. Like I would put making
I've
your own.
never heard a person say that.
Well, I don't like. I actually love teaching fourth, fifth graders a little more, but
Okay.
with middle schoolers, they're just discovering their identity. So I give them so much, like zine making your own poster, make your own self-portrait. Like I put so much identity-based art making towards middle schoolers because like I want them to think about that and like claim themselves and their identities at a young age, because as you grow older, people society chips away at that. So it's really nice to like give that empowerment to a middle schooler. So I think about where their brain capacity is at emotionally and all of that. How could you contribute to that and their motor skills?
And did you read some books, or you just learned this like crash course? You ask people, how did you find out what's appropriate for the different levels of children, like their ages?
I did some research. So I asked around some, so I have a friend that's an English teacher at a high school and another friend that teaches math to third graders. And I just asked them. And they teach different subjects, like I said, but I applied what they do in English and in their math courses, I applied that to teaching as an outline. So regardless of what kind of class or subject it is, the outline that I gave you is a basic outline for any teacher, for any subject.
We're at about 5:15 right now, so I'm gonna just choose some questions, help choose some questions, and you might see something on here, Zeina.
Yeah.
How do you help English learners understand the projects? Have you ever taught art in Lebanon? Are lesson plans different in Lebanon than they are in the United States?
So I taught my cousins. I don't know if that's not formal.
Did you teach them in English or Lebanese?
And I taught I definitely taught cousins English from Arabic. That's like normal, and they taught me my Arabic because my Arabic.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. But I suppose the most is I mean, let's be real, we're in Los Angeles. So the most difficulty I had, I don't speak Spanish. So, and there's a lot of Spanish speaking students, and that's a little more relevant for Los Angeles than Arabic. Um, so within that, my thing with that is being really clear. Like I said, I always use a combination of visual, audio, and written text, because even if it is in English, it being written down, you're giving them the time to like take their time to read it and absorb it. And if I could translate all of my course lesson plans to Spanish, I would love that too. Because let's be real, like this is Tongva land, and California was once Mexico. So I think I use all visual, all learning aids to your advantage, and that's helped me with helping kids with English as a second language. It also helps that it is art because it is a visual language, so I visually show them.
Go like this, Zeina.
Yeah.
Zeina, go like that.
Yeah.
Another question. How do you go about encouraging students when they struggle in art? Do you have accommodations?
It depends on the struggle. Because some students just need a little encouragement and a lot of verbal affirmations. So especially if you're in a classroom setting or even on Zoom, it's really cool to call out students. It puts pressure on them that they're being seen.
What did you say to me the other day? Is that when all else, what did you say about shame? Something about shame.
When all else fails, just use shame. Like shame's the best as far as like. So like use, for example, if a student clearly didn't put any effort into this work and they're trying to pull off like it's this thing, you know, and instead of really reprimanding one student, or I just put a student up that did do well and make them an example. So really make examples of each other. Like that's what I'm saying from this. It's not, I don't use shame. Don't shame your students, but make their work public on each other. It's not, and just make them understand that like you're putting up their assignments, and it's not a reflection of directly who they are. It's a thing that they made. So yeah, so negative and positive reinforcement is really done well by simply putting the work up in front of the classroom. And I think it's really important, and I've seen this happen a lot with little kids too, is people devalue their art. If you have a 5-year-old kindergartner in your class, respect that painting that they made as if it's a fine art painting by like Paul Cézanne. It doesn't matter. And I think it's really important to give weight to the things that little kids make as much as adults. With little kids, at first, when I first started out, I used to always put my hand in and be like, let me help you out, and like draw that line out for you. And I stopped doing that the more years that I learned and became a better teacher, because it's really good to just allow the students to do it for themselves and make those mistakes, and then just encourage when things go well. And if they don't, that's okay too. Just like tell them to keep going.
So you mentioned what your favorite group to work with is. You said 4th and 5th graders, right?
Yeah.
Which is someone asked, what's your least favorite or the hardest to make lesson plans for?
Middle schoolers.
So they
I do not like middle school. Like personally, like being around middle schoolers is traumatizing for me almost. I'm a grown adult.
I think it's traumatizing for them too to be around each other.
It really is. It's traumatizing for them and for me, because there's just so much happening within middle schoolers. And as much as I love teaching little kids, they are exhausting. So whenever I'm teaching a class of kindergartners or 1st graders, I don't really put classes after them. I always put them at the end of the day, because I'm going to be exhausted afterwards. They take so much, it takes so much watching, and like on a different level than it would with adults.
What are the standards? What is this thing called standards that people use when they lesson plan, and how, and like when did you start using them, and do you always use them?
I think what you're referring to is like the teaching standards that they have at like LAUSD.
Yes. Do you use standards when you make your lesson plans?
So I'm familiar with them. However, I don't teach at the LAUSD district, so that frees up a lot of that for me. Mm-hmm. Because teaching in a unified district is very different than teaching in a nonprofit or a workshop setting or a university or a college setting. With the unified district, they have a very they creating the syllabus for you basically. It feels like they're giving you the lesson and you're there to implement it. So the freedom that I have in creating lesson plans that I have here, I don't know how possible it is within the unified district. There's one really good question here as well. Are your assessments for young learners more informed? Oh, okay. Can you give one, or do you?
Mariana, can you let us know about how much time we have left?
It's up to you guys and how long you want to talk. But you can wrap it up if you feel like you're ready. It's your show, so.
Okay. I'm not sure what that means.
I mean, some people have stopped at 45 minutes and some people have gone on for an hour and a half. So it's up to the speaker how long they're open for questions. So.
Okay. Zeina, how much longer would you like for this to go?
Let's keep going until 5:30.
Okay.
Yeah. How does the students feel about that? Is that the length of your course?
I mean, they can go until 6:45 because that's what time the class ends.
Okay. To go to let's answer a few questions till 6:45 or so, if you're down for that.
Wow, that's a long time. Do you want to go that long? I mean, it's up to you, but.
I mean, 5:30 is only 5 minutes away.
Right.
Let me see here if there's any other questions I could answer for you, and then we can just cut it from there.
Okay. All right. Well, I was thinking like maybe 15, 20 more minutes, probably be enough time based on the questions that are there.
All right. So we'll cut out at 5:45.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, my assessments is not based on quizzes and tests, as much as I would love to give vocab quizzes to like a workshop activity. I affirm and assess them by talking to them within the course. So I pay attention to whether they read the vocabulary, because I tell the students that I'm going to use the vocabulary in the class as I speak to them. And if they don't look at the vocabulary, they're not going to understand what I'm going to say, because I'm going to use that language within the course. So I reinforce and assess the students throughout the course by using the language of the course in the class and see where they are capable of using that language in return to me. And if they're if they could, if we can have that conversation, then they've definitely been paying attention to the assessment of the class, to the class. And I assess them always based on not whether they completely mastered it the first time, but usually all of my assessments is based on an arc of how much did the student learn over the period. So you're looking at improvement in many cases. Have you created developmentally, I hope that answers, developmentally appropriate lesson plans for toddlers? I'm curious with their sensory exploration inclinations. I have not developed lesson plans with toddlers, but I feel like we would just be screaming at each other in the room. I would use it as sensory. And honestly, I don't know, because like I think babies are so cute that I don't know, like I would have a hard time teaching them, because I just want to like pinch them, you know? So I have that issue. So like kindergarten and up, I don't know if I don't have any experience teaching toddlers, honestly, other than like just babysitting my cousins. Are your assessments for more informal? No. I look at the state standards, but I don't consider them in the grand scheme of my lesson plan, because I don't have to. The only time I really put them into consideration and studied them further is for LA MuseArt, because the director of the program said that the parents wanted to see if they could, if more of the state standards could be inserted. And so I inserted it. I have like, you know, the zine and the fun projects, but we'll insert far more like color theory and like page design and like things that are more like state standards of how people see art, which is usually like more like acrylic painting on canvas with like normal big stuff. But no, I don't have experience with that. Have you ever had to work with students who aren't artistically inclined and who get frustrated while doing crafts? What tips do you have to motivate children or tweak lesson plans to ensure that they enjoy it? Yeah, so most students and children don't think they're artistically inclined whatsoever. Everyone has the joke of like, I can't even draw a stick figure. That's what they always say coming into the class. And I always remind them that you don't actually need to be a good drawer in order to make really good works of art. So I try to lean on allowing the student to explore the material enough so that in the end they could feel like they succeeded rather than failed. And that has to do with me honoring the work that they make. So I found the most frustrating thing is for the student is to constantly go in and then like do repairs, just like red mark. Like that's the most infuriating thing it is for a student, is to like constantly go behind them and then repair their work behind them. And it's like, if it's a 6-year-old, that's really hurting their feelings, like really bad. So I think it's always important to allow them to make the work and then give them suggestions. Because if we're constantly repairing it as we go along, it's really like, it can be really disheartening. So you want to give encouragement as you go along versus negative reinforcement. And then in the end, if they didn't put in that labor, which you could always tell if a student didn't put in labor, you just put it on blast. And that's the first thing. Put it up and as a class.
So they go on blast if they're lazy. That's the only time.
I don't really like putting them on. Usually I'll just put like something that did it really successfully up.
Yeah.
And then through that, then they will be self-reflective within their work. I actually don't need to put the work that didn't work out as well on blast. I could put the work that student did put effort up into, and then that then automatically makes self-reflection in the other students. Yeah.
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 I have a question. Did you a role model or somebody that really influenced you and in the way that you teach, your personality in the classroom growing up or even in college?
Um, I was taught by Samantha Fields and Michelle Rosick from California State University, Northridge. And I think they were the most impactful to me as teachers. I admired them so much as teachers. Samantha Fields is a painter, and she runs the painting department at CSUN, and then Michelle Rosick runs the printmaking department. And they're opposite personalities in many ways. Sam is super bubbly, full of that encouragement and that reinforcement and that effort and that time that you really feel like the teacher cares. And I think that is like the biggest thing as a teacher. If like you really care, then the student will care. And Sam really did that for me. And then Michelle Rosick is super organized. So that's where I get that from, is I paid attention to how she formulated her classes and her encouragement within the classroom. And what made me feel like I succeeded in that class was that, again, hyper clear, so clear in everything that we're going to be doing and implementing in the course from beginning to end. And it's not clear on whether you draw a teddy bear or a surfboard or like a revolutionary poster or whatever, but it's very clear about the objectives of the course and how they were going to assess me afterwards. And then after I completed, I felt like accomplished. So I think those two were my inspiration, and I just pay attention. So Zeal is one of those examples. Actually, she taught courses at the Kamripsker as well, and a lot of creative lesson planning that I find very interesting to what all of you were talking about, in which if it's not art-centered, you could talk about storytelling, narration, different things and aspects to art. You could also talk, if you're like a mathematician, you could totally go full mathematics on art. Like full on, and that's super relevant too.
And then where do you get your rubrics from? You said it's important to include the rubric. How do you,
So
so the students know what a rubric is. The rubric is the thing that you're going to use to kind of grade them. We also talked about critique, like how do you, and we talked about soft critique and hard critique for children. And I thought that was a cool thing that it would be nice if you mentioned to the students today also.
Yeah, so I do critiques with little kids, whether it be a 5-year-old or an adult. I think it's an important skill in like learning what you're seeing and learning how to see. So a soft crit is basically the artist introduces their work, and then the audience has a gauge from the work and what the artist said, and then is able to talk about the work. And then a hard crit is zero introduction. You just put the work on the wall and then you talk about it. No guidance. I usually though I like having both available, because sometimes kids say the darndest things, and it's really cool just not giving them direction too and letting them come up with, what do you see in this? Do you think the student was successful in conveying the emotion of anger or happiness or whatever it is? And then also giving them guidance as to what to look at when critiquing. And that could go into a technical crit, where it's like, did the student have their clean edges? Were they able to technically like implement the project? And then more of a conceptual crit, and that comes to not the subject but the intent of the artist. So the critique is, did the intention of the artist come across within the work? And you could apply this to, let's say, creative writing. Did the intention of the story, the intention of the writer really was conveyed inside that story or inside that painting? And you could do that with 5-year-olds. Don't be scared. Like, little kids are totally, it's so smart. Kids are smart. Yeah, so as far as critique goes to concept, I'm really talking about like intention of the artist, and how much could the artist have gone further? And then you could always ask, what is one thing that you would do to improve this work, and what is one thing that you think didn't work within this project? So kind of like, that's some basic critique guidelines that you could use for a 5-year-old or a 45-year-old. Same thing.
Student asked, do you incorporate cross-curricular elements in your classes? For example, do you teach history, science, etc., along with the art lesson?
Yes. So for example, within etching, I taught a course so for example, the 3-tier course that I did at UC Davis, I included monotype, monoprint, not as much of a historical element because it's the basis of printmaking and learning printmaking, but I always think of cyclical history, and if I'm afraid of talking about present times, I can always talk about the present times via a past time of it when it reiterated. So and I always think yeah, to try and find, because printmaking is always taught from Western leaning, that as if it's all like invented by Europeans or so. So I try to find projects that are not so Eurocentric. So I include collograph, and then through the teaching of collograph and carborundum printing, I'll include historical texts and writing on the WEP, which are Black printmakers who invented the collograph, including Doc Thrash, who invented carborundum printing and the collograph. So that's a Black printmaker who invented a printmaking processes a long time ago.
I never knew that. And you're only only the first person I've ever actually heard say the name. I've only read it. I've never heard anyone actually say Doc Thrasher's name.
Oh, Doc Thrash is awesome. I'll support him. I just donated and they saved his house, and I'm so happy that they did. They're turning into the Doc Thrash Museum.
Wow.
I'm so excited because I don't want Doc Thrash to be forgotten, because he's really the only, like, that's not Eurocentric, that created this processes that is so stunning and beautiful and has like mezzotint etching qualities, but it's so yeah, it's just Doc Thrash. Cool. And then etching, I actually included writing on the French Revolution. So, so in my history majors and because most of the people taking printmaking and beginning printmaking, they're just taking it as an extra class in addition, because they're like history majors or botany majors and math majors, different majors, and they always take those beginning art courses as general classes to fill out. And my history majors were really into that. So I will generally find historical writings that includes printmaking inside of them. Yeah. So I include history through writing and assessments. So all of my projects usually have correlating reading and then some kind of writing exercise with the student. So that's how I insert the history, and then I'll talk about it a little bit like while I demo. So I'll talk about like the history of paper making while I'm making the paper and showing it to you. It just makes it like more of a well-rounded activity.
Let me just repeat what you said, because we actually talked about it on the weekend a little bit too.
Yeah.
And I think my original question to you when we like kind of, ran through some possible questions was, how do you handle difficult subject matter in the classroom? It included offensive artwork, and it included potentially political work done by students.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about what you just said, which is, okay, well, I picked something that's outside of the country and maybe in a different time period, but parallel in terms of the situation for the kids to focus on in the lesson plan.
Yeah. So when the beginning of the elections happened and there were a lot of marches happening 4 years ago, I did a couple workshops on making protest posters that some people wanted, on how to make a protest poster. And I just had a hard time, and as much as the women's marches were happening and all of that, I wanted to teach them historically, where did protest posters come from, especially within printmaking and relief protest posters. And that's where we really leaned on the Chicanics movement and the labor movement that they went through, and that really had a lot of relevance to the beginnings of printmaking protest posters. So I'll just referred. It's like the historical, but it's happening right now. And also, don't be afraid of hard subjects. So if a student really wants to bring up a conversation that is heavy-handed, just allow it to unfold in the classroom. I generally don't stop it, but I also don't really instigate it. I kind of just allow it to unfold, and there isn't really anything to be afraid of from those dialogues, but to give space for them, because for the most part, especially with little kids, like elementary and middle schoolers that are listening to what's happening on the TV, and they're not talking about it with their parents. The place that they get to talk about it is in the classroom amongst their peers. And right now we're over Zoom, so they don't get that opportunity to talk about it even over recess. So there's a lot of information there that the students need to unwrap. So allow them to unwrap it in the class.
I think you said something also about helicopter parents on Zoom.
Yeah, that's an issue too, because it gives less, it's like you're less able to allow that kind of conversation to happen if there's a helicopter parent on a Zoom and they're like paying attention to every word and they don't like what is being said, and you're like, it's like every parent is in the Zoom with the student, and it's like.
One of the students asked, what's your favorite type of lessons to teach? I mean, you kind of talked about printmaking and papermaking, but does that question, is there a different way that you can answer the question? Do you have specific favorite lesson plans or projects or crafts or whatever that you do with the students that you like? Maybe
Yeah,
three.
so I really like projects where it allows the participant to investigate themselves within it. So that's why I really love teaching like making your own zine, especially to like middle schoolers and up, because it's such a big investigation into the formation of their own identity and them investigating themselves. And this zine is theirs. It's all about you. And I love those kind of lesson plans. And I think that's why I like paper making too, is because I then go to the student and be like, okay, well, now you know how to paper, you can make it out of any paper. And that like gives so much to the student to like insert themselves within the project. So I really like projects where the student can insert themselves in it. So that's why I love those kind of projects.
We've got 3 minutes left, and let's see, is there any particular incident that stands out to you that happened in a classroom that you just want to share? It could have been poignant, it could have been funny, it could have been sad, anything, just some crazy whatever experience.
I had a student pee in my classroom. The middle class. They were 5. But that's also really important.
Okay. Yeah, and I was like, did they pull the pants down?
No, they just stood there and peed, like with their pants on and everything. I mean, like, it was kind of precious because they were just like staring at me like this, like, and just peeing. And literally in my eyes, and it was really precious. But like in navigating situations, especially when you're teaching little kids, it's really important not to like make the kid feel embarrassed whatsoever. So immediately when I noticed that, I just took all the rag towels, threw them on the floor, walked the kid downstairs so that the parent could come pick them up immediately, talk to the kids, and like, we all pee, right? So it's really reaffirming that like we all pee, we all fart, we all do this. So like there's no need for body shame at the art studio. There's like no need for it whatsoever. I do have some advice because I've had so many schools, because I've taught a lot of students with developmental disabilities, and I've had a few schools try to separate them from my classes and make me teach a specific class for special needs children. I don't like that. I would prefer them to be in my class with the rest of the students. This pushes that student, because I'm customizing each lesson plan anyways, because I'm a good educator, to the needs of the student. They don't need to be ostracized into a different classroom. So, and it's really important for all kids to be together.
Yeah.
Dependent, regardless of ESL, regardless of developmental disabilities, regardless of all of that, I think it's important for kids to be able to learn how to coordinate around each other, learn that people are different from each other, and think and work differently from themselves. So I think that's something that really came up often, actually, within a couple schools where they tried to separate my students from each other. I'm all like, no. No, they stay with me, they stay with the other students, they're fine. And the kids work with each other, they like have each other's backs over time. Yeah,
That's such a beautiful thought to end on, that, you
Yeah,
know, bringing everybody together, kids figure it out, you know,
Yeah.
and we'll figure it out if we're open to each other. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. This is a wonderful talk. It's such an honor to have you come visit, and our students are so lucky.
oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for moderating, Zeal. You did great.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and
Yeah.
visit, Zeina.
Okay, so I just want to tell my class that I'm going to go back to the Zoom room. So if anyone wants to talk to me about anything, I'll be there for 5 minutes. If no one shows up, I'm going to just like, I'll be gone for the rest of the day, and you'll have to message me the normal ways you do. And let's all give Zeina like claps or sounds or emoticons and thank her, put it on the chat or whatever. Thank you. Woo!
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I
All
appreciate
righty.
all of you. Thank you,
Okay.
Zeal, for inviting
Talk
me.
to you later. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coordinating this, Anna.
Thank you, Marianne.
All righty. We're closing this now, right?